Chapter 3. The Rogue Knight's Gambit. Azural moved through the forest, her steps cautious, each one sharpened by an edge of pain. The silence was thick, pressing against her senses, and she felt the constant prickle of something unseen just beyond her sight. Her breath steadied with effort, her body still unfamiliar, but her resolve had hardened. Whatever lay ahead could not be worse than the flames from which she'd emerged. Then a sound, a footfall, barely louder than a whisper against the undergrowth. Azural stopped, every muscle taut as she pressed herself into the shadow of a tree, her heart thundering. She wasn't alone. Another step, this time closer, and a glint of steel flickered through the trees. Her instincts screamed, and she turned, flames flaring to life around her hands as she lunged. Blue fire crackled as she threw herself toward the intruder. Steel met fire, and sparks flew as her fist collided with a blade, her gaze fixed on the figure in the dim light, her breath coming fast and shallow. He moved with practiced ease, parrying her flames without fear, his stance balanced and precise. She glimpsed his face, a man, his eyes sharp and unyielding, his mouth set in a grim line. "Easy," he said, his voice calm but edged with warning. He held his blade steady, making no move to attack, though his gaze didn't leave her. "If I meant you harm, I wouldn't be speaking." Azural's flames danced around her fists, her eyes narrow and dangerous. "Then why follow me?" The man's grip tightened, but he didn't raise his sword. "I thought you might need help." "Or you thought I was weak," she spat, her flames flaring hotter, casting blue light across his armor. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his expression. "Weak? No, not weak. Just unstable." His gaze dropped to her hands where the fire wavered. "You can barely control it, can you?" Azural's jaw tightened, but her grip on her power held. She let the fire dim, though she kept her fists ready. "Who are you?" The man gave a slight bow, his eyes gleaming with something between respect and wariness. "Talvar. Once a knight, now a fugitive, an exile like you, though I suspect our crimes differ." Azural scoffed, her eyes scanning him for any sign of deceit. "I don't know you, and I certainly don't trust you. Exile or not, knights don't wander through cursed forests without a reason." Talvar's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I'm no knight any more. The kingdom I served branded me as an outlaw. The soldiers hunting me are as relentless as they are unmerciful, and I doubt they'd spare you either. So I thought I'd offer an alliance." Azural eyed him, the fire in her hands flickering. "Why help me?" "Because survival out here favors those who don't travel alone," he replied, his tone matter of fact. "And because I've seen the way you fight." He nodded toward the smoldering remains of the beast she'd left behind, his eyes narrowing. "Few could have left that in such a state. You're no ordinary fugitive." Azural didn't respond, her mind caught between suspicion and curiosity. His gaze held no deception, only a guarded sincerity, tempered by something darker, a wariness she understood all too well. "If you're hunted by the same forces, they'll find you soon enough," she said coldly, testing him. He inclined his head. "Perhaps, but they'd expect me to travel alone, and they'd never expect me to have an ally with fire in her blood." Azural's anger flared, her fists igniting again. "I don't need anyone." Talvar met her defiance with a calm gaze, the hint of a smile on his lips. "Perhaps not, but you need answers. You won't find them in ashes, and you certainly won't survive this forest with nothing but fire and fury." The words stung, their truth undeniable. She clenched her fists, forcing the flames to sputter out, but the anger remained. "Fine, but one betrayal, one misstep." She let the threat hang in the air, her eyes sharp. "Understood," he replied, sheathing his sword. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her terms. "I don't trust easily either." They moved forward in tense silence, each step a careful truce. Talvar kept his distance, his movements precise, his gaze vigilant as he scanned the shadows around them. She watched him carefully, noting the way his eyes swept the forest, how his hand hovered near his sword. Whatever had forced him into exile had honed him into a soldier of necessity, not a knight of ideals. She could respect that. The forest thickened around them, the twisted trees knitting together like a canopy of skeletal arms. Shadows pooled between the trunks, stretching toward them with each passing moment. Talvar's expression tightened, his steps slowing. "What is it?" Azural asked, her voice low. "We're not alone," he murmured. "Stay close." Before she could respond, movement rippled through the trees, figures emerging from the undergrowth with a practiced stealth that marked them as trained hunters. Their armor was dark, glinting faintly, their helmets obscuring their faces, but each bore an insignia, an emblem of a sun split by shadow. "Bounty hunters," Talvar said, his voice barely a breath. "They're after me, but they'll kill you too if they think you're my ally." Azural's fire surged instinctively, blue flames dancing along her arms. "Then let them try." Talvar drew his sword, his stance widening, his expression hardening into grim focus. "If you lose control, we're both dead before the night is through," he warned, glancing at her. Azural's eyes narrowed. "Then stay out of my way." The bounty hunters moved in, their weapons glinting as they spread out to surround her and Talvar. The leader, a tall figure with a cruel sneer barely visible under his helmet, raised his sword and barked an order. The hunters charged. Azural sprang forward, her flames flaring as she met the first attacker head-on. She swung her hand, blue fire slicing through the dark as her flames seared through his armor, sending him sprawling back with a scream. Beside her, Talvar fought with precision, each strike of his sword calculated and exact, his movements a practiced dance of steel. They fought as though they had done this before, each instinctively covering the other, their movements weaving together in a deadly rhythm. But as Azural's fire surged, a darker, wilder force pushed at her control. She felt it rising within her, a tempest of heat and rage that threatened to consume everything. Her vision blurred, her heartbeat quickening as the flames crackled around her, licking at the air with fierce hunger. A bounty hunter lunged, his blade cutting through the shadows, and she struck out with a burst of fire, her movements almost unconscious. The flames roared, filling the clearing with searing blue light, consuming her opponent with terrifying ease. Talvar glanced her way, his eyes widening in alarm, but he held his ground, his sword a blur as he cut down another foe. Azural felt the fire cresting, pushing her to the brink of control. With a final surge she released it, blue flames flooding the clearing, sweeping over the last of the hunters. Their screams were brief, swallowed by the blaze, leaving only smouldering armor and the faint scent of charred earth. When the fire receded, the forest fell silent once more, the ground scorched and steaming in the aftermath. Azural staggered, her breath ragged, her vision swimming. She felt the fire retreat, leaving her limbs weak and trembling. She looked up to find Talvar watching her, his expression sharp with something between concern and caution. "That fire of yours," he murmured, sheathing his sword. "It's as dangerous to you as it is to your enemies." Azural glared at him, but her words faltered. He was right, and the truth of it gnawed at her. She could feel the power within her, vast and uncontrollable, a force that obeyed nothing but its own will. She didn't respond, unwilling to show the weakness that lingered in her bones. Talvar held her gaze, his voice softening. "I've seen power like that before. It's unbound, and it won't stop until it consumes everything in its path." She looked away, fighting the doubt clawing at her. Her fire had saved her, yet she knew, deep down, that it could just as easily destroy her, but she wouldn't admit that, not to him. After a moment Talvar's tone turned practical. "We should move. There may be more of them." Azural nodded reluctantly, forcing herself to stand taller, to bury the weakness that lurked beneath her skin. She followed him deeper into the forest, her gaze fixed on the path ahead, even as her mind churned with unease. As they walked, Talvar's voice broke the silence, low and cautious. "I don't know why you're here, or what you're running from, but I can see you're after something. If you want to survive long enough to reach it, you'll need to control that fire of yours." Azural clenched her fists, feeling the heat simmer just below her skin. "I'll control it. I'll master it, and I'll use it to destroy the one who left me in ashes." Talvar's eyes gleamed with understanding, though he kept his tone neutral. "Then perhaps we're not so different, you and I." The word surprised her, but she didn't respond. They continued in silence, the weight of the battle settling over them, an uneasy truce lingering between them. As dusk fell and shadows grew longer, they found a small clearing surrounded by dense thickets. Talvar set a watchful stance, his hand hovering near his weapon. Azural kept her gaze on the forest beyond, feeling the quiet stirrings of memory. Wings against the sky, dark eyes filled with hatred, a name whispered in her mind like a dark promise. Vuva. Whoever he was, whatever he had done to her, she would find him, and she would unleash the fire within her to finish what he had started.